I want to talk about the wrongful conviction of this man. And I'm doing this case first because I think it's important to note that wrongful convictions do happen. And when we talk about this man and actually what, I know, Jenny, I've acknowledged that. When I talk about wrongful convictions, they do happen. Now, if you are, you're 7 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted if you're from the black community, which is a terrifying statistic. And we're going to talk about this, why he was convicted. He was actually found innocent after 48 years and released at the age of 70. Sorry, Jenny, I'm literally so poorly at the moment. I'm really snappy. I'm hot, I'm cold, I feel sick, my back's killing. I'm literally like, I've aged about 160 years. So we are going to talk about Glynn Simmons' case, and I'm going to thank you, Lulu, thank you, Stace, thank you everyone for all the gifts. I'm going to do this. So he was given 7.5 million on release that he had to fight for, but does that really make up for it? No. Does it make up for it at all? His son was 3 when he was convicted, and it's his son that feels the most angry. Like, Glynn is not that angry, and by the time he was released, he had horrific cancer. He is just grateful to be out, and he obviously is angry that they convicted him on such little evidence. Thank you guys for all the gifts. But his son is really angry. His son says, like, you know, I didn't get to have a dad. I grew up rebellious, angry. I did so many things I never would have done if I had a dad. And there's always the byproduct, isn't it? It's the people around him. He didn't get to be out when his mum passed away. And his mum, he said he was haunted by her screams in the courtroom when he was found guilty. So we're going to talk about this. I'm doing this from an article from The Guardian because I've spent so long in the last few days looking at the Stephen Avery case. I can't research multiple cases when it's such a big case. So this is an article that's... it's called, I spent 48 years in prison for a murder I didn't commit. Here's how I fought for my freedom. And it was released on Wednesday, 28th February 2024. So this was Glynn when he was convicted, and this was Glynn when he was released at age 70. So Glynn Simmons had been in Oklahoma for only 6 days when he was arrested on suspicion of robbery. He was 21, he didn't have a criminal record, and the police had no obvious reason to pick him up that day in 1975. The robbery victim didn't recognise him, and said to the police, this isn't the guy that robbed me. And so he was released. Now, on his way out of the station that day, the police said, could you just come in for another lineup for us for another crime? You're not the person, obviously, but we just need another guy. And Glynn, not knowing that he had his right to refuse that, his mother had taught him to respect officialdom, the police. So he said, yeah, of course I will. I'll take part in this lineup. And he was picked up. He was picked in that lineup, and he was charged with the murder of a 30-year-old woman whose name was Caroline Sue Rogers, who had been shot in the head during a separate robbery. Along with Don Roberts, he was convicted. The 2 men who had never even met each other in life, they were sentenced to death row. Now, what was really terrifying is he was arrested. His trial, there was only one black person on the jury, and he was dismissed. So it was an all-white person jury that actually ended up convicting him. And from the start of his trial, jury selection, to the day that he was convicted, it was 2.5 days of testimony. That was it. In July of 2023, Glynn was released and was exonerated. In December, he was legally declared innocent of any crime. Now 70, he has spent 48 years, 5 months and 13 days in prison. The longest anyone in the US has ever spent behind bars before being cleared. Now, the reason he didn't get put to death, the only reason, is because 2 years into his sentence, it was commuted to a life sentence, which saved his life, because if he had been on death row, he would have long been executed before then. I often, covering true crime, one of the things that always gets me, I hate wrongful convictions because of the time just wasted and the little value that people's lives have to the US Department of Corrections, or over here, it's not just them, but we don't do death sentences. But also because whoever did that is still out there. They got to go free. And that kills you. But one of the truest facts I can tell you about any justice system in this country, or in this world, I should say, any justice system, is it is absolutely the easiest thing in the world to wrongfully convict someone and to get them to false confess. All of that is the easiest thing. It's the hardest thing in the world to release somebody even when they're innocent. Once you have been convicted, to overturn that is almost impossible, even with all of the, no matter how much new evidence you have. It's ridiculous. You used the term miscarriage of justice, Simmons said in his sonorous voice, but what happened to me wasn't a miscarriage of justice where they simply got it wrong. What happened to me was deliberate, and there's another title for that. Is there a term he prefers? Yes, he said, attempted murder. They attempted to murder me because they put me behind bars on death penalty when they knew I had not done it. Thank you, everyone, for the gifts. It says in the article, we're talking on a video call. Simmons is a handsome man with an easy smile, which belies his horrific experience. He talks with a warmth about his childhood as one of 13 kids in a close family in Louisiana. Simmons tells me how he's a poor student and dropped out of school by the age of 14. By 21, him and his partner had a 3-year-old son who they named Glenn. And at this point, Simmons moved to New Orleans from Oklahoma for work. Hello, everyone coming in. If you're just coming in, we're just quickly reading this article before we move on to the Stephen Avery case. This is an article about this man here, Glynn Simmons. He was the longest person in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and he was only exonerated in 2023 after serving 48 years in prison. So we're just talking about his story in his own words through the Guardian newspaper. He says you have to understand the mood in Oklahoma City to begin to make sense of what happened to him. It was a place that back then, and still to this day maybe, seething in racism and injustice. It was what happened to a time where the serious crime had gone unsolved and police were coming under pressure to solve cases in the press. Oh. Let's have a look. Told he had been identified in the lineup, he assumed that he had a really low IQ. He just thought it was a mistake and it would be rectified. After the police were then there to uphold the law, not abuse it, but he was charged, and he assumed he wouldn't be because he wasn't even in Oklahoma at the time this crime was committed. He actually even managed to prove to the police that Carol Ann Rogers had been killed on the 30th of December 1974, and Simmons had flown back to Oklahoma for that time. So he wasn't even in Louisiana when this crime took place. He flew back to Oklahoma on January the 5th. So when it happened on the 30th of December, he was back home in Louisiana. So he wasn't there for 6 days until after 6 days after this happened. 12 witnesses testified that they had seen him on the day of the murder in Louisiana. So not in Oklahoma where the crime took place. So he'd had all these people, 12 of them, say, he was here, he was at home, and he wasn't in Oklahoma at that time. They saw him playing pool in the evening. Loads of them saw him at his mum's house. Some saw him in the neighbourhood. But every single one of them said he could not have been in the place where she was killed. At the preliminary hearing, the prosecution brought forward 18-year-old Belinda Brown, an identification witness, a customer at the liquor store. She had been shot in the head during the incident. When interviewed after coming out of hospital, she told the late Detective Sergeant Anthony Garrett, "My mind is all jumbled up. I have a brain injury because I was shot in the head, but it could be Simmons. I don't know." And so he altered her statement to take out a lot of that information to it just pointing the finger at Simmons. So what happened Carol Ann was shot. She was working behind the store of a liquor store, and Belinda was a customer in the shop. They were both shot. Carol Ann was shot dead, and Belinda was shot in the head. So she's kind of saying, like, you can't ask me to pick out a witness. I have a traumatic brain injury. Like, I don't know. A one-page document, separate from her other evidence, appeared to show that Brown had identified Simmons and Roberts at the lineup. Those are the two guys I identified in the lineup, and I identify them again now, she told the court. But it later emerged that she had not picked them two in a lineup, and lawyers for Simmons suggested the one-page report had been fabricated. So it seems like she's saying that she cannot pick anyone, that she's got a brain injury, but by the time it comes to sit in front of, thank you, Queenie, by the time it comes to sit in front of the actual trial, she's sure it's him, right? Because she's been told that, yes, it's got to be these two. Glynn says the trial was done and dusted in fewer than 3 days. That's including picking the jury and the deliberation. Right until the verdict, Simmons assumed he would walk 3. Even when the head of the jury said I was guilty, I thought he was talking about someone else. I thought whoever's guilty is in trouble, but it can't be me. And then it dawned on him that it was him he was talking about. What was the makeup of the jury? All white people. One black guy was on the panel and he was immediately dismissed. The thing he remembers most is a strong reaction of his mother, who died 12 years before he was released. She screamed a piercing scream. That's what I still haven't got over today. That scream. Was she a good mum? No, she was the best mum ever. It broke her to know that they had put me in prison and I was going to die. 30 days later, in June of 1975, he returned to court for sentencing. I was sentenced to die by electrocution on the 7th of October. I cried, I was pissed off, confused. I ain't even gotten over it yet, and that was 50 years ago. It's not surprising that Simmons is sane and the fact that he's sane is an incredible achievement, but he says it wasn't always that way. On death row, he was locked in his cell alone for 24 hours a day. He was allowed out 3 times a week for 15 minutes to go to the shower. I'm locked in a cell with the electric chair right next to me. I've had mental health issues that haven't been given a name yet. I went off the deep end a few times and I've been temporarily insane a few times. It's like a rubber band. It expands and it returns, but if it snaps, you don't come back. I never snapped, but I got close. Some guys never did come back. Some guys lost it and took flight. He believes that his period of mental illnesses are what have saved his life. He said, for me, it was like taking a vacation from reality. You make it sound lovely, I say. He rocks with laughter. That's what I'm trying to explain. It was a relief not to be so acutely aware of what happens every moment of the day. When you're temporarily insane, it's just you and your imaginary friends, and that makes it good for a little while. I look forward to the times when I just didn't know what was happening. He said, how did it change you? It made me grow up real quick. I matured. When he left school, he was semi-illiterate. After he was convicted, he received many supportive letters, but he didn't know how to respond adequately. Meanwhile, the man in neighbouring cells had started to pass his own letters, asking Simmons to read them for him. One day I snapped and said, man, can't you read? He started crying and said, no, man, but don't tell anyone. He was embarrassed. He said, well, I can't read that good either. We can teach each other to read, and that's what we did. Now I've got certificates in literature. Now I've wrote poems and stories that have been published. He realised he had to teach himself law if there was any chance he was going to be released. You need to find new appeals because that's the only way you'll get out. So I learned to write. Writing is fighting, and I learned to read. Reading is fleeing. You read a book and you escape. And there was a lot of praying, a lot of crying, and I smoked a lot of weed. It calmed me down. Hello, Kirsty, how are you? Simmons came from a religious Christian family. Lots of guys thought I came from a rich family. I didn't. I come from an average poor family like everyone else. But when I needed some money, I'd call my sister Margot and tell her to pass the plate. Thank you, Dawn. That's how we generate money. They were passing it amongst family and everyone put $10 in. And then if they sent me $100, at least $10 or $15 would go to the other men that didn't have anything. There were times on death row when he considered taking his own life, not because he was desperate, but as an act of resistance. I thought of suicide in terms of defiance. It's not I can't handle it no more. No, it never came to that. It's just before you come to kill me, I'm going to kill myself. After 2 years, his sentence was commuted to prison. Life imprisonment. So anyone coming in, we're talking about this man here, he's called Glynn Simmons. He was actually the longest wrongful conviction in the whole of America. He spent 48 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, a murder. And he was freed in 2023 when they realised that actually the evidence that proved it wasn't him had been in his file all along, and he had been wrongfully convicted. Now, he only came to be there because the police asked him when he was leaving the police station one day, could you just sit in a lineup for us? And the person in the lineup pointed to him. And because of that, he was convicted. By 1985, he says, so after 2 years, they commuted it to a full life sentence rather than death row. He said, so they let me off death row and put me back in the general population. I guess I was supposed to be extremely grateful for that I wasn't facing the death penalty no more. I didn't feel no gratitude. By 1985, his behaviour had improved and he was placed in a minimum security prison, and he escaped. He said the fence was only 2 feet high, so I just walked away. I was gone for 3 weeks. I was trying to cross into Mexico and I got busted on the border. They tried to give me a 2-year sentence running concurrently, and I said, no, I want to go to trial. Thank you, Kirsty. So I went to trial and argued the confinement was illegal, so the escape was justified. But guess what? I lost. Thank you, Kirsty, so much. During his final 30 years in jail, Simmons said he calmed down. He was focused on clearing his name and helping others to get their justice. There's a saying that hurt people hurt people. Sometimes it's the opposite. Hurt people can heal people. You can recognise the hurt and you can heal it. And I've been hurt so bad I could see and hear it and feel it in other people. In 1995, the trial prosecutor, the one who put him in prison, wrote to the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board saying, "I've been troubled, thank you, Jacqueline, for 20 years because I think I put a man behind bars that did not deserve it and did not do the crime." So although he had prosecuted his case and been the one to try his case, he then said for 20 years he had been woken up throughout the nights, some nights, thank you, Julian, because he realised an innocent man was in prison. 1 year later, a private detective working for Simmons discovered a missing police report showing that Brown had initially stated the man she identified as Simmons was 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds. Simmons was 5'8" and weighed about 150 pounds. It emerged that Brown had identified a number of witnesses from 8 lineups, none of who were Simmons. And Belinda Brown was the one who, in the court, finally said, "Yeah, I think it's him." She had done 8 lineups, and in every lineup she'd found someone. And that's because she kept telling the police, "I was also shot in the head. I have brain issues. I don't know. I'm confused." It emerged that in Simmons' lineup, Brown had identified number 6 as the suspect, but Simmons was number 2. Okay, we want Simmons. We already got the other guy. The other guy was the brother who later admitted he had been part of it, but he was never convicted. It's just so strange. He said, "I got this term I call the burden of innocence versus the luxury of guilt. It would have been a luxury for me if I'd been guilty. I did time with guys who pled guilty for murder, rape, kidnapping, all kinds of atrocious crimes. And they do a certain amount of years and they go before the parole board. And I say I feel remorse for what I did and they give them parole and let them go. Every year I went to the parole board and they turned me down because I claimed my innocence. I never got out because I said I was innocent, but I wasn't going to admit to a crime I didn't commit. My innocence became my burden, and that's why I did 48 years in prison." You don't see guilty guys do that kind of time. And we talk about that, don't we? That we want to see remorse from people before they're released. And a lot of the time we think people should be turned down, thank you, Stephanie, because they haven't shown any remorse. But what if you don't have that remorse because you didn't do the crime? What he is saying is very true. Like, he was saying, "I'm not going to apologise because I didn't do the crime. I'm innocent." And because of that, they kept him in for 48 years. Perhaps the most shocking thing about Simmons' story is that he needed no new evidence to prove his innocence. It had been there the whole time, just ignored. He told the Tulsa-based lawyer Joe Norwood the same thing had been telling the other lawyers for decades. The only difference is that Norwood actually listened. When Simmons discovered that Brown had not named him in the initial lineup, he knew he should be a free man because it was the only thing connecting him to the crime. He hadn't even been in the area at that time. He had not been in Oklahoma when this happened. He'd been at home in Louisiana. What's more, he said, when she did the photo fit, and she drew the suspect, none of it fit me. That was never disclosed to the jury. They didn't use the photo fit because it didn't look like me. So whatever she said in court can't stand no more. This is what I've been trying to tell lawyers that weren't listening to me. I don't have a law degree. I don't speak the language. I'm just a little old convict in the penitentiary. So they would never listen to me. Thank you, Jacqueline. He was initially released last year as an exoneree, meaning his conviction had been quashed because it felt unsafe. And like I said, black people are more than 7.5 times. Mel, thank you, Mel. Happy Valentine's Day. Thank you so much. Black people are 7.5 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted than any other race. 3 months ago, he was declared legally innocent, and now Norwood is determined to clear the name of Roberts, who was the person who was supposed to have committed the crime with him, who he'd never met before. And he has spent 48 years of his life convicted purely because the police managed to get him to stand in a photo fit in a lineup of men, and then even when he wasn't picked, they said he was. And I really think it is just thank you, Meg, thank you everyone, you're so lovely today. I really think it just comes down to the times when any old black man will do, to be honest. Any old black man will do, because you knew he had evidence. Thank you, Meg, so much. Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Naomi. You knew he wasn't even in. He was living at home in Louisiana. He didn't move to Oklahoma for work until the 5th of January. The crime happened in the end of December. He wasn't there. So this is him when he went in. And I've seen people. I saw a little old white lady get up in a courtroom, and when they said to her, not in this case, in another case, "You have sent this man to prison for the last 40 years of his life and you got it wrong, and you knew you got it wrong," she said, "Well, they all look the same. How was I supposed to know?" And so she was just saying all black people look the same. I didn't look any deeper. So I just want to I want to play this thing here. Hang on. I've got a couple of voice clips of him talking about his conviction, his time.
And they put me in the cell and told me I was picked out of a lineup in a murder case. The trial lasts almost 3 days. First degree murder, capital murder, death penalty case. This lasts almost 3 days. This includes the picking up the jury all the way to the deliberation. It really wasn't. They had no evidence. The state had one witness that said, she think it was me and looked like me. I didn't have no proper representation. I really didn't have no proper representation in the trial. I had at least six witnesses came in from New Orleans. Alibi defense testifying that I was in New Orleans. And the state didn't present nothing, but the jury decided to believe the witness instead of all of my alibi witnesses.
So this is a guy who had 12 people come from New Orleans in Louisiana and say he was still in Louisiana when this crime occurred in Oklahoma. And yet they just dismissed this. And the only black person who was picked for the jury was dismissed to bring in another white person for no other reason that we can see, other than because it's easier to get white people to convict black folk, right? In these cases. This is his son. And I think this is really important because I think it's like a forgotten victim of this, right?
I felt cheated.
He was 3 when his dad was convicted.
Out of an opportunity to have my dad, in the home with me, That's kind of something that made me become rebellious. People asking questions, how could you say your father raised you from a prison cell? It wasn't basically raised me from a prison cell, but it was like he guided me, in a certain direction. Maybe I would, had a different outcome, in life or whatever. Maybe I wouldn't have.
He, let me just find this for you. So he got 7.5 million, which is just not enough. He is battling cancer right now. He was diagnosed with liver cancer just 1 year before he was exonerated. He wasn't able to receive chemotherapy while in prison, so his cancer was getting worse until he was released because he wasn't able to get it from prison, which meant the cancer had metastasized by the time he got out. At the moment, he seems to be okay, but it's in his liver and his colon. He had it surgically removed in recent years. But he's really struggling. And one of the things that we don't realise is, so his family members say they keep waking up at 11 p.m. to messages from him, help in capital letters. And he's panicking because he doesn't know how to use a debit card. He keeps forgetting his PIN number. He can't understand the way that things are working. So he's constantly reaching out to them. And he's saying, I don't know what to do. He's phoned them crying from restaurants before and said, I don't know how to pay for this food. I don't know how I'm going to, where do you put the card? I don't remember the PIN number. I don't know how to swipe it. And they have to go down there and fix it for him. This is a man who's had everything taken from him. At one point, he had his bank card stolen. He'd written the PIN number on the bank card. And to us, that sounds like really, really normal, right? But for him, he's been released into institutionalized completely. He's come out. He's 70 years of age. This was him when he was walking into the courthouse when they were going to free him. Do you know what I mean? And had he not been released that year and it lasted another year, he would have died from the cancer because he was unable to get treatment at that time because he was a lifer. He spent 48 years, 5 months and 13 days in prison for a crime he did not commit. Now, from what I just explained to you guys, the evidence they had on him was simply a lineup that he was asked to take part in. They arrested him for a robbery. He came in and the guy who was robbed said, that's not the guy that robbed me. So the police just said, can you come in and just sit for this lineup quickly, which he did. And then the police decided to say he was the one that was picked out, even though the witness said, no, I picked number 6, he was number 2. It doesn't, to me, I always think so they give him 7.5 million, what does that do, right? He's got perhaps 10 years left. His children are raised. His one child is an adult who has gone through drug addiction, gone through so many different things that he says, like, maybe if I had a dad, it would have been different. We also have his grandchildren who have been raised without him. His mother's passed away. Out of his 13 brothers and sisters, only a few of them remain. What does that money do in the grand scheme of things? Like, it doesn't give back anything. He cancer has affected his liver and colon, which he thought he'd beaten after having it surgically removed, but it has recently just returned stage 4, so he does have cancer again. He said, I've got some bitterness and I've got some hatred, I'm human just like everyone else. What you do with it is what matters, Shit's going to happen every day. It's how you respond to it that counts. He has good days and bad days. He's navigated chemotherapy treatments while trying to reintegrate into a broader society. In the middle of several interviews with the Oklahoman, Simmons would sometimes have to pause, feeling on the verge of fainting from his name's Glynn Simmons, from his chemotherapy. The way I deal with it is that I haven't done all of these years just to come out and die. So I know I'm going to make it through. That's how I deal with it. And when I think about it, I don't think about cancer. The battles just shift from one battlefield to another, he said. I got out of prison, now I've got another battle. I've got to battle cancer. So he literally is just struggling with everyday things. And we don't think about that, but coming out of prison when you're 70, when you went in 1975 as a young man with a 3-year-old son, that is terrifying, because how do you kind of weigh up what is old and what's new? And one thing that always strikes me about these men, because I've covered several cases of these men being released from prison on wrongful convictions, they're never bitter. They're never bitter, and I don't understand that. Sometimes there's a little bit of anger, but they're just so grateful. They're really grateful, and it just breaks my heart, because I would be so fucking angry. So angry. I just could never even understand how they don't have the anger. I want to play this clip. This man here is the man who was convicted as the second man in the shooting. So they never met each other before, but he talks about the anger. But what I think he says, so he got out in 2008. He was only ever supposed to be into that, but he was wrongfully convicted. But he released in 2008. But this is what he says, and I think this is really important.
I didn't laugh, but I remember saying, "Is that all?" That's what I said. Is that all the evidence it took to take my life from me? My life has no value to you. None. My life is valueless to you. Valueless to you. You have no respect for my life. And then that anger came over. Sometimes anger is a survival mechanism. So I got stuck. I said, and when they said that, that's when I made my mind up. I'm getting out of this place as fast as I can. And every day I live, I'm going to make that jury a damn lie, because I did not do that. And every day that I existed, I intend to make it a lie. And that was my duty. My duty was make you a lie. One woman, one testimony, and you send people to prison, you want to take my life. Like my life has no value. Like I'm just a dirty dog liar. Like I would go and it floored me. Like I'm some punk thug. All what I've been through, and I persevered. And I would go in some liquor store and shoot down a woman.
Luke Mitchell, yeah. I'm going to do his case this week, actually. I'm starting a whole week in wrongful conviction, so Luke's case will be a part of that. I'm going to start tonight with Stephen Avery, the Making a Murderer case. We are talking about that tonight. I wanted to do this one beforehand. I'm going to do a lot of covers of wrongful convictions. Wrongful convictions are really my passion. I just can't believe that. We all think it, right? When we're growing up, we think, like, if people are in prison, it's because they're bad people. We never think about the fact of this faulty evidence. When we look into these cases from the 60s and 70s, believe me when I say you could be convicted purely off. I am Lucy Ali. It'll be my next Superfan fact. I'm just not very well today, so I've just not been able to do I wouldn't have been able to do it justice tonight. You can be purely convicted of being a black man or a black woman, and it is purely that was what was happening in the 60s and 70s. Not only were these black people pointed out, brought in, questioned, but then they were from a poor community where they couldn't afford lawyers or legal representation. Thank you, Jasper. So when you have a prosecution who are presenting a case and an attorney or no attorney at that time, or a really bad one who was the people trying to save your life and they didn't care enough because you were just another poor man, they were easily being convicted. And these were death sentences as well, and horrific crimes. Central Park 5 I'll do this week. I'll probably do the Memphis 3 again. I've started researching the Memphis 3 again because I feel like last time I didn't go deep enough in Memphis 3, the killing of the 3 young boys. Thank you, Megan. But I'm going to, over the next 2 or 3 nights, I'll be covering Stephen Avery as well as other cases, because it needs to be done in kind of bite-sized chunks, I think, to really make sense to people. So I'm going to start tonight with the murder of Teresa Holbach and what we do know about what happened to her. And we are going to talk about some of the ways in which the evidence kind of was given in court was supposed to be towards Stephen Avery. I personally don't think Stephen Avery commit this crime, I'm going to be honest with you. Do I think the police commit the crime? No. I think the police fit him up for this crime. I do believe that it may be that a family member of his was involved, because, and we'll talk about that tomorrow, other suspects, evening, Stacey. I do believe the police just falsified the evidence to make it look like Stephen Avery had done the case, because he was about to come into 36 million in wrongful conviction money for the crime he'd served time for. So I do believe that. I think we've got 5 minutes left anyway, haven't we, Simon? Central Park 5, we'll talk about them. We'll talk about all of the cases like that. Khalif Browder is one of my favourite cases to talk about. It's the most heartbreaking case I think I've ever covered. The video time, the documentary that's on Netflix, will be the one documentary I don't think I'll ever get over. What happened to Khalif Browder as a child, how he was wrongfully convicted as a child, placed in Rikers Island, one of the most violent prisons in the world, beaten and literally left with such severe mental health. Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Simon. That when he got out, he hung himself out of his mum's upstairs window where she found her son's body hanging, because he couldn't outrun the prison. He couldn't outrun where he had come from. And it literally is the most heartbreaking story. The publications documentary was supported by Jay-Z, who put the money into it. I convince anyone, I would recommend anyone, if you're ever going to watch any documentary, to let it be Time, the story of Khalif Browder. Literally placed in Rikers Island because they thought he stole a backpack, because he was a black young man. 16, I believe he was. And the rest of his life was, he thought he could hear voices. He thought, there's video on the on there where 20 or 30 men just attack this young kid in Rikers Island. They're stomping on him, and there's blood everywhere. And it's because he's not strong enough to prison. He keeps crying for his mum. And they want him to shut up at night time, so he keeps crying for his mum because he can't understand what's happened and why they've been taken. And I literally nearly cried talking about it because I've never gotten over it. As someone who has an 18-year-old daughter, thinking of them putting her in Rikers Island where she's going to be beaten. There's rumours that he was raped horrifically behind those bars so many times. And then his mum was told, like, unless you come up with this money, we can't even get him a lawyer. And she just couldn't get the money. She was so poor. She had so many kids. She was trying. And she was trying to get him a lawyer to get him out. And he served so much time in there that he just never came back from it. Let me find you this trailer. Hang on. It's honestly, I just don't barely ever forget about this boy.
Good evening. Today is May 15th, 2010. The time is now about 7:47 in the evening.
I just need to get my story out.
And you are Mr. Khalif Browder, is that correct?
Yes.
I was going home from a party.
911 operator 1719, where's emergency? 2 male black guys. They took my brother book bag.
There was a guy saying that I robbed him. They said we're going to take you to the precinct.
Did you rob somebody in the beginning part of May, Mr. Browder?
No.
The time is now 10 to 8. This interview is concluded.
Netflix.
They said most likely we're going to let you go home. Rikers.
Violent Rikers
in the country.
All right.
Look what he's doing!
Stop resisting.
But then
Fuck is wrong with you, man?
I never went home.
Khalif was my son. I know what he went through. I went through a lot with him.
I felt like I was done
This is
wrong.
them
I felt
doing
like
that to
something
him,
needed
look.
to be done about this. If I just say that I did it, nothing's gonna be done about it. I didn't do it. No justice is served. Nobody hears nothing at all. I had to fight. You want me to walk away like it's okay? It's not okay.
But I'm going to pause it for a second because they'll take down my gifts, they'll take down my life. I'll play the rest of the second. It's called Time. He was 16 years of age. He wouldn't admit to stealing a backpack, so they put him on Rikers Island. And then because he was so poor, he could not afford to get out. He was beaten by guards. He was apparently raped. That's not in the documentary, but he was apparently raped. He was stomped on. It was horrific what happened to him.
I lost my childhood. I lost my happiness.
Destroyed my life,
Sorry.
my family's life. This is supposed to be the greatest city in the world. And we're supposed to trust
She found
in
him in
this
that window,
justice
didn't
system.
you?
Where's the justice?
She came in from the store with some treats for him and he was hanging from that window and she just her other son, so she just stands there and stares at that window all day long. And I just can't even imagine as a mum. She blames herself because she couldn't get the money to get him out. He was a poor black boy, no one cared. And it's just literally, he got to the stage where he was trying to go for job interviews and stuff and he'd be on the bus and he would hear voices talking to him, so then he'd start like thrashing about and that, and everyone was just like thinking he was nuts. But he had head trauma, he had head injuries, like you saw that picture, I tried to move quickly, like he was beaten all the time and he was just crying. Is it not on Netflix anymore? It's always been on Netflix. Can someone, you found it, so it is on Netflix. Put Time, just put in Time, it's someone else has found it, it is on Netflix. I've watched it about 4 times and I swear to God, I do think it's probably one of the saddest documentaries I've ever watched in my life. Because we can pretend, right, that racism is still happening and institutionalised racism and systemic racism and all that, but these kids are still being locked up. That you know, innocent 5, the innocent 3, it's always from the black community. It is horrific what happened. It's called Time, the Khalif Browder story.